and I'm going to pose it against every single piece of periodical material and reference that I have, and it has to match up without me mucking with it too much. That is to say, I have to be able to take the armature when it's bolted together and fastened and lay it down on the glove, and within a few seconds pose the fingers out and not manipulate or maneuver them in any weird, inauthentic way, and it should be able to match those poses and those volumes and the contours, the reflections, and everything else as those referent materials that I use. I'm happy with that. Let's talk about the scale. Magic ruler has magically appeared, and it's a 6-inch ruler. Nothing really special about that. I'm going to give you the dimensions right now of the fingers from the knuckles to the tips and the back plate. And I'm going to give you about 90% of the dimensionality, the base dimensionality. Because again, remember, none of this is symmetrical, and that's very, very important. Not one piece is symmetrical. It has the basic symmetry. But if I showed you these templates, you would not believe how asymmetrical they actually are. So let's talk about what I'm going to be showing you. Obviously, we're looking at the ring and knuckle pieces have now been weathered back up again. The new ones that I cut. And, you do what you can. I was pressed for time. I didn't have a whole lot of time to really sit and noodle over it and let that eat into my client glove time. But I wanted to at least weather those up and bring them back up to the cooked levels that we saw before, if not a little bit more. I actually kind of like how that ring looks. Frankly, it looks a bit more like a part 1. Weathering, so it's not totally Becker sequence quality, but it looks cool. It looks really cooked, and so I'm keeping it. And while I'm on the ring, and I'll mention here again why I'm showing so many of these angles and things for this documentary. I've said this a million times. My lighting in here is very bare bones. It's very makeshift. The camera is awful, so it's a constant struggle to light this thing properly to show off, the details. But it is amazing how much light and shadow, again, will distort perception. And and me being really anal and going, God, I didn't have one more pickup light to light the bottom of that ring knuckle flat, and it looks really buckled up. But it's, you got to trust me. This is part and parcel to why these things have always given me such a hard time building them. And I think a lot of other guys too, because once you take it into a different lighting setup from your referent that you're using, or your reference that you're using, it can look really, really different depending on how the light is casting on certain angles and stuff. So, I'm sitting here wishing I had another pickup light to soften that buckle up, because it just looks really pronounced, which it's not. And we'll swing around at some point, I'm sure, and show that again after I reassemble the glove to begin working and actually bolt it properly to the back plate. So it's not bolted, guys. It's like I said, it's I've got the rivets. I've got a few rivets in the housings, laying in their spots. I had to put 1 or 2 side rivets in the knuckles to hold the fingers together, brace the pinky with an eraser. I think I've got another eraser braced under one of the other fingers just because it kept falling over. But when it's not bolted together, these are the trials and obstacles that you kind of face when you're trying to make a documentary, I guess. So I also want to mention there are a couple things, if you've noticed, that I'll be, I think, doing a little bit better job on the final copies. I'm not going to redo this glove. This glove is fine for my intent and my purposes in using it as the mother glove. The index, let's call it, and I'm going to show you how next part of this segment when I get into the construction more thoroughly. We saw a little bit of me starting the templates. Once I've got that going and I actually start shaping, I'm going to show you a lot of the shaping. And again, this has to do with light, but this also has to do with just working this glove to death. And while it looks beautiful and I'm really just stoked with it, there are a couple things that I've got to take a little bit more care with when I get into the final, builds for all my final gloves in using it, and am doing that. The depression point on the index, the crease, looks really super pronounced here, and it's a bit of the trick of the light and the camera. To be really honest, if you've seen it in other areas of this documentary, for lack of a better word, it looks far less pronounced. I mean, it's really, these are the things that I work with. It's why I work with light and shadow and reflection when I'm building these things in all these different angles, because you got to be really, really careful. And, it's workable. It is a tiny bit too pronounced, and that is easily fixed. I don't want to muck with it anymore, though. I chose to leave it as is because, quite simply, everything else is pretty damn close, and I run the risk, if I muck with it too much, of really ruining the piece, and you guys know what I mean. So I kept it. It's a little bit too depressed. It's also about 2 millimeters too high across the diameter of the piece. So, I'll be lowering it down just a little bit, and just using a little less pressure when I actually create that crease, and the little kick up spot on the right, the little kind of warped buckly thing that happens right over the edge of the back plate, is probably, and literally this is how these minute changes can have such a drastic effect on it. It's probably about 1.5 millimeters too pronounced up, but it's still workable. I mean, it's passable. If I'd made this glove as is, and taking away the Becker finish, if I had used this as one of my final gloves, it'd be fine, and I'd send it out. But I would always try to pay attention to those details going forward. So, this is a really good pose, and I know I'm talking, but I thought it was important to mention. And that's really specifically, a lot of this stuff is specifically for guys who build gloves, for me to kind of go, yeah, I deal with it too. It's truly amazing how this thing can change. But anyway, I'm digressing. So what I was going to say in closing this out before we get into the actual scaling of all these pieces as I kind of see them and have figured out, that's why it's really good. This pose is really, really good because it's one of the few straight-on shots in terms of the actual physical screen prop that are available, where you can really see what the lengths of the pieces are doing, because in other shots and in other poses, and if the back plate is tweaked and bent and angled, the lengths can really play tricks on you, and you go, well, this looks long, this finger knuckle looks longer here, or this one looks shorter. And this is one of the, I think, like the two or three really good straight-on shots where the fingers are pretty much at their proper incline, and you can really see what the lengths are doing, and the rivets aren't riding high or low, and so this is a pretty accurate representation of the actual finger lengths for visual reference. So let's talk about the scale now that I've taken up another 9 minutes here of talking about this fucking thing. I'm going to do 3 base scale reference measurements for each piece. Go base to the top. I'm not going to give you the top to the fantail edges of the rivet anchor points. It's the one piece I'm not going to. You're going to have to figure that out on your own. But I am going to give you what I call the T-span. The circumference, diameter, whatever you want to label it as, that goes across from the widest point to the widest point on a 90-degree angle. The index knuckle, and these are my measurements, from the base to the top, or length, if you like, is 3 5/8 inches. Across the T-span, 1 13 1/2 inches long. I'm not saying these are accurate. I'm saying this is how I've come to grips with the scale. So let's take a look at the middle. The bane of my existence, the middle piece. From the base to the top is 3 10/8 inches long. The T-span 1 15/8 and a hair below, just not even a quarter of an eighth below that. But that's just me being really, really anal. So from the base to the top of the ring knuckle is a solid 3.5 inches. Across the T-span, 1/8 inches long. And finally, we'll take a look at the pinky and we'll remove it from its rubber eraser brace. And the pinky dimensions as far as what works for this glove from the base to the top is 12/8 inches long. And across the T-span, 14/8. And when you hear these dimensions, they must sound very small for as big as it looks, but therein lies the age-old dilemma of when you build these things, how much, it's like, it can't be that small, it can't be, yeah, it is. So let's take a look at the index, and again, I'm going to give you some dimensions here. I'm not going to give you everything, but I'm going to give you enough. We're going to give you 2 points of reference, as we did with the knuckles, but also a third, which I'm going to try and help you out a little bit with. So, on the index, we're going to start from the base to the tip, and this is the very top cut-off point where the triangle shape that you create where the blades jut into the housing ends, and that will be the end of the measurement. And then we're going to do the T-span across this as well. But I'm going to give you a third dimension here too to help you out, from the base to the bottom fantail rivet attachment point, because it's a difficult area. So from the bottom on the end tip piece is 2 3/8 inches. T-span, 2 inches. That's the tip width from end to end, if you were laying it out flat. And let's just call it the corner, from the base to the edge of the corner, is 3.5/8. And you down the row to the middle. Here we go. Base to the tip, 2 4/8 long. Across the T-span, 3/8. From the base to the corner is 4/8 plus 1/16. And moving now down to the ring, removing its eraser brace. And the ring is probably one of the most problematic tips there is, in my opinion. They're all problematic, but you know what I mean. So let's take a look. From the base to the tip is 2 4/8. Across the T-span is just a hair below 2 inches. From the base to the corner is 4/8 of an inch. And finally, the pinky. Yes, the pinky we all love to hate. So asymmetrical, isn't it? From the base to the tip is 2 3/8 inches long. Across the pinky T-span, 2 inches. And from the bottom to the corner, or the base to the corner, 4/8 of an inch, or 4/8. All right, so we've taken a look at the basic finger construction. Let's take a look at the back plate. And the back plate presents an interesting problem in that it's completely lopsided, it's completely asymmetrical, and the bottom has an upward curvature of about, I don't know, 3/8, depending if you're going to the highest point. But let's take a look. These are the basic dimensions from the base to the top. And the top will change depending on your point of view. And across the back plate T-span, as the familiar telltale signs of Travis's neighborhood come into play. Yes, I live in a siren zone. Charming. We'll just wait till that fades out and I'll give you the